Hello, and welcome back to episode 5 of Dare Me to Prosper, where today we are going to talk about self-love, self-worth, and what is it? What actually is self-worth? What is self-love? What do people mean when they say that? And most importantly, is that something that you have? Do you have a high self-worth or self-love? Or maybe you are not as self-loving and valuing as you may think you are. So that is what we're going to talk about today. I feel like my voice is a little bit off, and I feel like I say that every time that I record an episode lately, but I was watching Eat, Pray, Love while I was walking on my walking pad, and Eat, Pray, Love is one of my absolute favorite movies. And a lot of people hate on it because they say, oh, it doesn't really have a plot or whatever. But for whatever reason, I just resonate so strongly with Eat, Pray, Love and the whole message. And I actually started bawling during one of the scenes just a little bit ago before I got on to record this. So now I feel like I'm a little bit off in my voice, but that's okay. It's actually really fitting because Eat, Pray, Love actually has a lot of just that messaging about self-love and self-worth and self-value, and really grabbing hold of the things in life that are meaningful to you and not ignoring them and not shoving your own wants and needs aside. So anyway, I don't know if you've ever seen this movie or not. I think it's worth a rewatch if you have, or if you haven't, you should definitely watch it because, I mean, who doesn't love Julia Roberts anyway? But regardless, all of that aside, let's get into this episode. So self-love is something that I think gets crapped on a lot. It's kind of coming back around now in 2024, but I feel like for a long time, especially when I was in, say, high school, college, a young adult, like the past, I don't know, 10 to 15 years, I really feel like self-love, the message around that, it was often seen as like selfish, or self-love was kind of seen as something maybe you were prideful or conceited if you had a lot of self-love. It just had a bad messaging. And now, thankfully, I think most of us know better, especially women in general. I think we have done a pretty good job of coming around and recognizing that no, actually, this is not only is it not selfish, but it is absolutely vital to having a healthy mindset, healthy mental health, and to have healthy relationships with other people. Because if you don't value your own worth, you are just honestly not in a place to love other people very well either. Or if you are in a relationship, it just comes with all sorts of trauma and baggage, which we'll get into. But what even is self-worth, right? So how would we define self-worth? So what self-worth is it's basically the intrinsic value that you assign to yourself based on your own feelings of self-respect, your own dignity, your own importance. How much worth do you believe you have? And I think that's a hard question to answer for a lot of people. It's really rooted in recognizing that you are deserving of love, that you're deserving of respect, that you're deserving of success, regardless of external achievements or validation from other people. And so when I phrase it that way, it really makes me think, do I have self-love? Do I value myself? Because I think that's really hard for a lot of us. A lot of us don't always feel, or maybe we say that we feel that logically, but we don't act in ways that show that we believe that we deserve respect, that we deserve success, and so on. And also, just to note, self-worth is a little bit different from self-esteem in that self-esteem really comes from kind of the opposite, right? If you have a lot of self-esteem, oftentimes that does rely more on your accomplishments, your appearances. Self-esteem does relate a little bit more to other people's opinions, whereas self-worth or self-value, right? I mean, think about if you own something that has a lot of value. Like, let's say you own an antique that has a lot of value, right? And you know that antique has a lot of value because you know about it, right? You know its history, you know maybe where it came from, you know what it really is and why it holds value. But if somebody, Joe Schmo, comes off the street and takes a look at this antique, it's like the Antiques Roadshow, right? I don't know if my mom watched the Antique Roadshow as when I was a kid, and I remember I absolutely hated it. But it was basically this show, about people come in and they bring something that they have, an antique of some kind, and they're trying to figure out what is the real value of it. And sometimes it doesn't hold that much value. And sometimes it's like, oh yeah, this is worth $1 million. And they're like, what? And, so if Joe Schmo comes off the street and just looks at this antique, he might not know. He might look at it and be like, well, that's a piece of trash. But in reality, the truth of the matter is that it's not. It is very valuable, and there are people out there who would pay $1 million for it because they know its true worth. It's kind of like that when you are considering your own self-worth. It's not about what other people believe about you. It is because you know your own value, you know your own worth, and you operate out of knowing that. I hope that makes sense. Self-worth also really encompasses self-acceptance, meaning that you have an ability to love and accept yourself without needing external validation or approval from anyone else, and that you are accepting of yourself. You are accepting of yourself regardless of mistakes you may have made or actions that you're not proud of or what have you. It doesn't change your value or your worth as a person. So I'm using these phrases kind of interchangeably, but just for the sake of really defining it, I would say self-love is the act of loving yourself, whereas self-worth is understanding your true value. And so self-love is really like a verb, and self-worth is more of a noun. So you may already be getting kind of an inkling of whether or not self-worth and self-love is something that you struggle with, or something maybe you have a high self-worth, or maybe you don't and it's something you really struggle with, or maybe you're somewhere in the middle and some days you have it and some days you don't, which I feel like is pretty common. But having these things is truly, and I think most of us, like I was saying, understand this now. There's been more talk about it. It's more of a trending phrase. It's been more of a topic that is at the forefront for a lot of people. You're hearing more about it. It's really a foundation of your well-being, of your emotional resilience. It's a foundation for healthy relationships. It will enable you to be more resilient in general, to face challenges, to set boundaries that you can actually hold, to cultivate a sense of purpose and fulfillment in your life. Because again, if you value yourself, you value your own wants, you value your own needs, you value what's important to you. And therefore, you have the ability to be more confident in what you feel your purpose is. So basically, it's a huge deal, right? It is a huge deal. And I think this is, again, something that I think we hear a lot. We hear this phrase. We're aware that it's important maybe, but a lot of us don't really know how to define it, how to implement it, how to practice building a stronger foundation of self-worth. And so that's kind of what we're going to get into a little bit today. And again, if you are still somebody that thinks or has this kind of core belief, maybe from your past or your childhood, that self-worth and self-love is a selfish thing to have or to work on, let me just be the first to drill into you that before you can build upon this, you have to make sure that that belief is really rooted out. That cannot have a place in the back of your mind or in your subconscious and also have you heal and grow, because if you have that as a core belief, something in the back of your mind will feed you guilt or shame when you do things for yourself, or when you try to hold your boundaries, or when you try to stand up for yourself, or when you try to do something that's best for you, even if it's difficult, it puts you and another person in a difficult situation. There will be a voice in the back of your head that makes you feel guilty or shameful if there is anything left in that belief that says self-love is selfish, self-love or self-worth it's about you, and you're putting yourself before other people, blah, 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 whatever it is. You have to root that voice out. And a lot of this does come from, not to hate if you consider yourself a Christian, but I I do think that is something that I have seen in my past, that a common misconception that many times can come from this Christianity belief system says that you can't love other people if you also love yourself, or if you're loving yourself too much, it will turn into this all-consuming, prideful, conceited, I'm obsessed with myself and therefore I'm not able to love other people. There's a huge difference between self-worth. Self-worth is not prideful. Self-love is not prideful or conceited. It is not an overstated self-esteem, right? We mentioned that self-esteem is slightly different than self-worth, because self-esteem deals with how other people view you, or based on your own accomplishments or how you look, things that relate to other people. Self-worth and self-value has nothing to do with things you've accomplished or what you look like or any of that. It is all about just inherently having worth, just for existing, just for being here, just for being yourself. You automatically hold worth and value because you're a human being. So I just wanted to note that if you are somebody that has that little voice in the back of your mind, that's going to take a little bit of time. It's going to take a little bit of practice to weed that out. So let's just say for a second, how would you gauge your level of self-worth or self-value? If you're thinking, I think I have it, I don't know, sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Here are some things that either you practice often or you don't practice often that might give you a clue into how much self-worth you have or are practicing. So this one might seem a little bit counterintuitive, but it is parenting yourself. Do you parent yourself? Meaning this, I would say that this would be an act of self-love, like the verb, right? Parenting yourself, meaning do you take care of yourself even when it doesn't feel good? Are you doing what's best for yourself? Do you have that self-respect where you're taking care of yourself, right? So like, let's say, you have some bad habits that you have just really let slide, and it's something that you're not proud of and that you struggle with, whether it's poor eating habits or whether it's poor drinking habits or poor relational habits, like getting into toxic relationships over and over again. An act of self-love is recognizing where you're not treating yourself well and correcting it, right? It's the difference between authentic self-care or shallow self-care, right? So self-love, taking care of yourself, a shallow self-care. You hear about self-care a lot, but what do people think of a lot of times when you think about self-care? You think about getting your nails done, or I don't know, treating yourself, going shopping, maybe getting a massage. A lot of those things, at least for me, come to mind when I first hear the term self-care. I think for a long time, that's what a lot of us were just conditioned to think about. But real, true self-care is not about just treating yourself to things, although it could look like that. It's more about, what do I need? Not just what do I want? What do I need? What does my body need? It needs good nutrition. It needs fresh air and sunlight. It needs healthy relationships. It needs less stress. So authentic self-care, true self-love is not always going to be something that you want to do or something that necessarily even feels good, because a true act of self-love might be breaking up with a boyfriend or getting out of a toxic relationship. That is not something that's going to feel good. It might feel awful, but is it what you need? Is it a true act of self-love? If you know you're in a horrible toxic relationship, but you're not getting out of it, it's almost like self-abuse, right? Truly parenting yourself and taking care of yourself is a real act of self-love. Another thing that is a great sign of do you have a high self-worth or not, is how much confidence do you have in your own decisions? When you make a decision, how confident are you in your own decisions and in your own choices, versus how much do you second guess yourself because you're afraid of what other people will think, or will they judge you, or are you going to let them down? If you set a boundary, are you confident in that boundary, or are you constantly second guessing how other people will feel about that boundary? Are you a people pleaser? That's a big one. If you are people pleasing, that is automatically not an act of self-love. It is very much kind of a low down on the self-worth. It's very much putting other people before yourself in a way that is detrimental to yourself. Not that we never put other people before ourselves, right? If you're a mom, you put somebody else before yourself almost every day. But there comes a point, if you are constantly serving someone else to the point where it is detrimental to yourself, that is no longer helpful to anyone. And it's certainly a sign that you are not practicing self-love and may need to consider, am I in a place where I have a healthy self-worth? Inner dialogue, that's another big one. And we're all guilty of this, right? But what does your self-talk sound like? Do you ever catch yourself speaking to yourself or having thoughts about yourself? Are they positive? Are they negative? Do you ever think to yourself, you know what? I'm so proud of myself? Because if you've never had that thought, that should be a red flag going off in your mind. If you have never had the thought, you know what? I'm so proud of myself for that. That's a huge red flag, because that tells me that not one time have you been able to recognize your own moments worth celebrating, whether it's a decision that you made or a promise that you kept to yourself or something really hard that you did. If you haven't thought, I'm proud of myself, I hope you listen to the rest of this episode and I hope you really take that home and sit on it and think about it, because this is really important. And if that's you, self-worth could definitely be something that is having a much bigger impact on you than you may realize. So pay attention to how you talk to yourself. Pay attention to your self-talk. Recognize whether it is majority positive or majority negative, because we all talk negatively to ourselves sometimes, right? It's normal. It happens. But is that the primary voice in your head? Is the primary way that you speak to yourself negative? Or catch how you're talking to yourself and then think, would I speak to my child this way? Would I speak to a family member this way? Would I speak to a partner or a parent this way? If you would not speak to somebody that you love that way, then why would you speak to yourself like that? Another huge clue to whether or not you have a high self-worth is emotional resilience. How well do you bounce back from setbacks? Do you have a growth mindset, or do you sometimes have a victim mindset? Do you see challenges as opportunities for personal development, or do you see a challenge and succumb to it and think, why does this always happen to me? Again, I'm never going to get over this. I'm never going to get out of this situation. Here we go again. It's always me. And again, I think a lot of us are guilty maybe of doing that at first. Like maybe something negative happens in your life and you might have a few minutes of, oh gosh, or maybe a day, or maybe a week or two of, God, why not me? Why is this happening? This is so hard, blah, blah, blah. But at some point, do you turn around and think, you know what? I'm not going to be a victim in this situation. I'm not going to let this have this much power over me. I'm going to see this as an opportunity for growth, or I'm going to see this as an opportunity to overcome the situation, to learn a lesson, to what have you. Do you have the ability to bounce back from a setback? Or do you tend to allow yourself to get sucked into the tornado of negative emotions? That is a big one. And self-compassion, which does sort of go with inner dialogue, but that's another one. Self-compassion being, do you treat yourself with kindness and understanding during times of failure or struggle? So again, if you make a mistake, or if you maybe do something that you're not proud of, if you do something you promised yourself you wouldn't do, something you're embarrassed about, if you are feeling down on yourself for whatever reason, do you have the ability to feel compassionate towards yourself? And again, with all of these, it's not necessarily that we always respond perfectly immediately. It's not that we never talk down on ourselves. It's not that we never get sucked into the tornado and the spiral of emotions. It's not that we never doubt our own decisions, or that we don't, have shallow self-care and don't necessarily do what's best for us. It's just that, do you recognize eventually when it's happening and attempt to correct it? Do you recognize when you're letting yourself go down a bad path and parent yourself back onto the correct one? Do you recognize when you're not having confidence in your decisions? Do you recognize the inner dialogue? All of that stuff. Do you eventually, at some point, are you able to call it out and say, you know what? I don't like the way that this is affecting me. I'm going to make a different choice now. If you can do that, I think you can confidently say that on at least on some level, you are practicing self-love and have some self-worth, even if you're still working on how often you are making good choices to support yourself. Also, some things to look out for when you are considering this, when you are thinking or trying to figure out, where do I fall on this self-love scale, right? There are a few traps that are like pitfalls or barriers to self-love that often we can get sucked into without realizing it. And here's what they are. So again, things to look out for. 1, perfectionism. Striving to be perfect immediately undermines your self-worth. People pleasing immediately undermines your self-worth. You do not need to be, let me tell you something. This is one bragging point. I don't have many, but I will say I am not a people pleaser. I've never been a people pleaser. However, I know and I'm close to many people pleasers. And this is what I will tell you. I can tell you firsthand from being close to people pleasers how toxic it is. And by the way, not being a people pleaser does not make you a selfish person. It means you have strong boundaries. I'm not a people pleaser. I don't know if that was just a childhood trauma that I didn't get and I got lucky in that one department, but I think it was actually the opposite. I think I probably had childhood trauma that forced me to set boundaries, and that was just the way that I responded to it. But I have never been scared to tell people no. Maybe it's my astrological makeup. Who knows? I've never been afraid to tell people no or to just set a boundary and recognize, you know what? That does not serve me. It would serve you only. It doesn't serve me. Now, it doesn't mean that I never do things for other people. Again, I have 3 kids. I'm constantly doing things that don't serve me and that serve other people. But I'm doing that out of a place of love, and because ultimately that makes me happy. It makes me happy most of the time to do things for my children because I love them and I want good things for them, even if it inconveniences me or is difficult for me, right? It's an act of love. But there comes a point where I say, you know what, this is actually becoming detrimental to me, and I'm recognizing that, and therefore I have to draw a boundary here. And I do that with my kids. And I think as I'm thinking about it, I think that's a pretty good example of a relationship you can do that with. Like if I say, no, you know what? I love you so much. I'm not going to read a bedtime story tonight because it's way past bedtime. I'm tired and I'm irritable. And if I don't get 30 minutes to myself before I go to bed, I'm going to lose it. And that's okay. And that's okay to set the boundary. And you know what? A lot of moms, just like in lots of situations with lots of relationships, wouldn't want to do that because they'd feel guilty or they'd feel bad. And so you people please, with whether it's your kids or whether it's with somebody else, you people please because you would rather avoid the guilt than do what's best for you. And becoming a non-people pleaser means you have to figure out how to get rid of the guilt, which means you have to get rid of that core belief. You cannot listen to the voice in your head that ever tells you that self-love or self-worth is selfish, because it is absolutely not. And you can recognize that by exactly what we're talking about right now. People-pleasing is toxic. Self-love is not toxic. If you are constantly serving somebody else's needs before your own to the point where it is detrimental to yourself, that is a toxic situation. That's a bad situation. You might feel better because you have this programming that tells you that I'm a good person if I give them what they want before I give myself what I want. And I'll feel guilty if I do it the other way. That is a toxic situation. Okay. And I know that is a really difficult programming to undo, but that is if you are a people pleaser, that is a point of tension that that trigger is something you should work on. When you choose to not people please, if you hold a boundary and you realize, you know what, I want to say yes to this thing because I'll feel guilty if I don't. But honestly, I know in my heart of hearts that it is not good for me, and it's better for me to hold a boundary and not overserve someone else to my own detriment. And when I get that voice in my head that tells me to feel guilty about it, I'm going to recognize that that is a lie. That is a lie. That is a core belief. That is a false belief that I have from somewhere in my past, somewhere in my childhood. I'm going to recognize it as a lie, and I'm going to let it go. There's no reason to feel guilty for loving yourself, drawing your own boundaries, recognizing that you have value, and that you don't have to other serve people to your own detriment. So, okay, I got into all that because I went down the road of talking about perfectionism as a pitfall, as a barrier to self-love. The next one that would be a barrier, the next thing that would be a barrier is a fear of judgment, fearing how other people think about you, worrying about other people's opinions. Everybody struggles with this in some way, shape, or form. Some people have very little fear of it. Some people have a lot of a fear. But we all, because we are human beings that grow up around other human beings, and honestly, at its core, I think it's more of a survival instinct, evolutionarily, right? It's a coping mechanism that we've all formed, this fear of judgment. And really, fear of judgment is also people-pleasing, because if you fear what somebody else thinks, you are prioritizing external validation over your own validation. You are externalizing, or you are prioritizing someone else's needs or wants or opinions over yours, which will lead you to just feeling inadequate, feeling unworthy. It leads to a cycle of shame, a cycle of self-doubt, and it just breeds more of this feeling of unworthiness. And again, when you don't value your own worth, you become inauthentic, right? Authenticity, which again, we also know is highly important. Authenticity is what allows you to live a life that is worthwhile. If you are not living authentic to yourself, then you're living for other people, and you cannot possibly find joy in living for someone else. If you are living an authentic life, what that means is you are living in alignment with your true values, your true beliefs, your true desires, and that you don't succumb to the societal pressures or external expectations around you. If you are living in alignment with your authentic self and your authentic values and what you want and what you believe, then you are embracing who you truly are, and that feeds self-worth and self-love. I want you to picture for a second somebody who exudes self-worth and self-love. When I picture that person, to me, that person is also somebody who is living a joy-filled life, expressing themselves authentically. They're full of confidence, right? Because they have confidence in who they are. They have confidence in their decisions. They have confidence in the choices that they make. Therefore, they are not wasting a bunch of time worrying about how other people feel about this decision or that decision. And a lot of things like bullying or people who are just mean or cruel or hurtful to other people, those people have a low self-worth. So automatically, somebody with a high sense of self-worth, they're going to be kind. They are going to be loving. They are going to be healthy people to be in a relationship with, because they are not cutting you down out of their own insecurities, right? What do we know about, say, like high school bullies? Think about, if you knew any bullies in high school, right? Or mean girls. Those girls, we learn as we grow up. We know now we're girls, and you still see this. You see this on social media. You probably know people like this in your life. People who are mean to other people have a very low sense of self-worth. They're very insecure, because 99% of the time, people who act out, who are they cut other people with their words, they are mean or cruel or toxic, that all comes from a place of trying to escape their own feelings of shame, of guilt, of self-hatred. Those people are worried about how other people think about them, and they have all of these nasty feelings, whether they're from trauma or who knows, whatever got them to where they are, with all of these feelings of self-hatred and shame and guilt and just negativity. Those people become the bullies, the narcissists, the mean girls, the nasty people of the world. So I want you to remember that, because it's important for you to actualize in your mind self-worth. Having a high self-worth makes you a kinder person. It makes you a person who is healthier in relationships. It allows you to be authentically yourself, and somebody who is authentically themselves is a kinder, healthier, more whole person, because you are not so concerned with other people's opinions. You're not carrying around guilt and shame and hatred for yourself, which is it's basically a snowball of negativity. If you're carrying around low self-worth, low value, you don't treat yourself well, you don't respect yourself, you don't hold any love for yourself, all of those feelings snowball, right? Negative energy breeds more negative energy. Positive energy breeds more positive energy. Whichever side of the fence, if you have more negative, a more negative view of yourself versus if you have more self-worth, whichever side of the fence you're on, you're just going to get more of that. Somebody that has a lot of self-respect, a lot of self-compassion, you also have compassion for others. You also have respect for others because you're not so centered on yourself. Being self-centered is you're paying attention to all of these negative emotions that are happening inside of you. If you feel whole, if you feel content, if you feel confident in yourself, you're not constantly looking in at yourself because you're content. You are at rest. You are at peace with yourself. You can now turn and face outward to the world around you. It's the people who are most unhappy inside that are turned inward in a negative way. Turning inward doesn't always mean something negative. Turning inward can be a good thing. But I mean, like, self-absorbed people are people that are self-absorbed with their own negative emotions. So having a lot of self-respect and self-compassion creates relationships based on mutual respect, mutual communication, mutual emotional balance, because you are not, if you don't have those things, you are basically more likely to be in a relationship that feels very dependent or that has a lot of fear in it. Because if you're not whole, if you're not loving yourself, you're going to search outside of you for that, which means you're going to be very dependent on somebody. I'm speaking now mostly in romantic relationships, but this could also apply to family or anything. If you don't have self-love and you get into a relationship, you are going to be depending on the person that you are in a relationship with to give you that same feeling of love because you don't have it. So you're going to depend on them, which means now everything that they do in the relationship is going to either feed or remove that feeling of love, which means you are automatically just in a yo-yo situation all the time with this person, ebbing and flowing on the love that they are or are not showing you because you're so dependent on it. And this is how relationships turn toxic. I feel like I'm a little bit scatterbrained now, but all of this is so connected. And I think a lot of times we talk about trauma, we talk about relational trauma, we talk about, all of these different aspects of love between other people without recognizing that if you don't first hold a high amount of self-worth and a lot of value for yourself, you really can't function well in a relationship with anybody else. Because if somebody who has a high self-worth gets into a relationship, it's easy for them to recognize if their needs are not being met or if they're being mistreated. Because if you have a low self-worth and you are in a relationship, you're so dependent on this love that you're seeking that you over-forgive. Yeah, and you don't hold strong boundaries because you're not confident in yourself. So you are letting people walk all over you. You're not really holding these boundaries. When you don't feel loved, instead of recognizing, hey, this person really isn't giving me what I need, you're just going, oh, I'm not feeling what I need, but I'm so desperate. I'm going to keep reaching for it. I'm going to keep forgiving. I'm going to seek out more love because you're basically like starving. It's like starving for food. You're starving for that love because you don't have any of it within you. So you're starving for it and you're looking for it in other people versus someone who has a lot of self-love, a lot of self-worth. They are confident in themselves. They're not starving for love. So when they feel mistreated, it's much easier for them to just have the awareness, oh, I'm being mistreated and I value myself and I have self-respect. So I'm not really interested in putting myself in this situation over and over again where I'm being mistreated. Maybe I've communicated my boundaries or my needs, but it wasn't listened to. It was disregarded. So now my boundary has been crossed and I'm going to do something about that now. I'd like to leave this relationship. It is no longer beneficial. It's no longer a reciprocal love situation. You have a higher awareness. So this episode is getting a little bit longer than I anticipated, so I want to wrap it up, but I do just want to mention a quick list of applicable things that you can do to practice and build self-worth. So I'll say the first thing is, out of all of the things that I've discussed in this episode, I think it can be really important to kind of write those things down, or if you have a clear enough mental space, to just take note of the things that you maybe are practicing well and are not practicing well, like holding your own boundaries, like parenting yourself, all of those things, right? Just take note. Am I doing these things well or not? Again, practicing a kind inner dialogue. Affirmations are a good way to do that. Repeating positive affirmations, whether it's writing them down, whether it's saying them out loud, whether it is recording them and playing them back in your own voice. That I've read scientifically that makes them much more effective to hear them in your own voice, listen to them in your own voice. That's a really good way to do that. But just practicing that inner dialogue and those affirmations for yourself. Altering your core beliefs, which that's easier said than done, right? We're all trying to do that on some level. But the first step is just recognizing core beliefs that are off, that are toxic, that are not truth, that may be lies. Recognizing those core beliefs and then using things like inner dialogue to slowly shift them. It doesn't happen overnight, ever. But the more that you catch them, just recognizing something is half the battle. So recognizing a core belief is oftentimes a huge part in itself, just of being able to change them. Holding your boundaries, that's another one. Confidence in your decisions, we talked about. Parenting yourself, we talked about. Reevaluating your relationships through a lens of self-worth. So take stock of your relationships, especially your romantic relationships or your close family relationships, and think, do I have self-respect inside of this relationship? Do I hold my boundaries? Do I value what's important to me? Do I people please, right? Do I serve somebody else's needs over mine to the point where it's detrimental to me? Just take stock of it and point out to yourself, write down maybe where maybe you are failing to do those things and sacrificing yourself for the good of somebody else. Not even the good, just for the wants of somebody else. Avoiding comparison. This is a really big one, obviously, with social media. But constantly comparing ourselves to others, just the act of comparing yourself, especially because 99% of the time what you are comparing yourself to is not an accurate representation of real life at all, right? You're looking at people with a filter, you're looking at people in a specific pose, it's social media will always be a highlight reel. Comparing yourself right off the bat is automatically cutting down your self-worth. So attempting and practicing not comparing yourself to other people. Practicing a growth mindset, which means when you encounter a difficult situation, recognizing that you are not stepping into a victim mindset, but that you are seeing those difficult situations. I know it's easier said than done, and a difficult situation could be something really traumatic, or it could be just having a bad day. So there's a scale, but trying to see those situations as an opportunity for growth and something that you can, in fact, overcome, and not getting swept up in the negativity of it. Forgiving yourself. That is a really big one. Just having compassion for yourself. You know, maybe you hold a lot of shame or guilt or disappointment in yourself from past situations. Recognizing those, again, 99% of the battle is just recognizing that something is there. Recognizing situations where maybe you are holding on to resentment for yourself, and practicing self-compassion and forgiveness for mistakes or just things you're not proud of. So that was a lot. This is definitely the longest episode I've done so far, but I just feel like it's so important. This is something I've really been thinking about a lot lately. Also, as I'm staring at my television screen, you should go watch Eat, Pray, Love if you think about it. In light of this episode, thinking about the things that I've discussed today, it truly is really a good representation of self-love in practice and self-value in practice. This feels like a serendipitous moment that I just happened to watch that today. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much for listening to Dare Me to Prosper. If you can, please take a moment and leave a 5-star review if you have enjoyed any of my episodes so far. And I will see you in the next episode of Dare Me to Prosper.